Hey everybody, you guys hear and see me okay? Hey everybody in the chat, what's going on? Mr. NAC himself. What's up, NAC? And yeah, I think he's just going to be lurking or just hanging out a bit. I don't know. Jose Maguina, what's up, dude? Oh, I haven't heard from this guy in a while, Mr. McLean. He's been MIA for so many months now, huh? There's Puck Elf. Good day to my friend from the land of Down Under. Damn, we got Australia and we got Canada. Damn, we're almost all over the world here. There's my lady, Catheta Cat Gray. Hello. Let's see who else is here. Oh, hey there, Moon at Noon. Can everyone hear and see me okay? Am I showing up fine? Yeah. Hey there. Okay. So I guess we might as well start. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about a little I guess one of my personal favorite topics in the Fortean fields, as they say. We have all these different topics here. Thanks, Jose. Showing up pretty good there, Donny. All right. Okay, so we've been getting into these topics for a while now, and people from other shows who followed me here, you guys were all into like ghosts and Bigfoot and UFOs. But there's another topic that I feel like doesn't get enough, I guess, playtime, and that's the topic of reincarnation. Also, NDEs. That's another one that I feel like not enough people, or at least the people in our circles, have talked about. But those were two topics that I always found fascinating, also, and we don't talk about them enough, especially reincarnation, because I would probably say of all the topics that have fascinated me personally the most, with regards to like the spiritual, supernatural, and the paranormal, I'd say right up there would be the topic of reincarnation. And there are a couple reasons why. First, I have my own Buddhist beliefs. Traditions in Buddhism and Hinduism are deeply rooted in concepts of reincarnation, although, their details differ between different traditions, of course. I kind of like the idea of being born and, dying, going into the afterlife, and incarnating again in a different time and place and in a different body, almost like a video game, right? When your character dies, he starts over again, and it's time to play the game anew. And I guess different New Age groups and Eastern philosophies talk about it quite a bit. Some people there's some controversy going on with people talking about how they think Christianity could have, I guess, accounts of reincarnation, although I don't totally buy that. But I think the conversation is interesting nonetheless. So Puck Elf asks, I wonder if this is linked to Miyamoto Musashi Book of Five Rings. Yep, we're gonna go there. We'll go there. I've had my own personal experiences with the particular. I mean, of course, if reincarnation is real, then pretty much all of us have had our experiences, right? But I've had a few experiences with past life regressions and psychic readings and my own personal things that I've witnessed and gone through that leads me to personally believe in reincarnation. But that conversation is a topic for another show entirely, where I will talk about my own reincarnation stories, but that's not the topic for tonight. No. The other reason why I find the topic of reincarnation to be fascinating is because the idea of historical figures coming back, I find to be compelling. A while back, I did a podcast and we were talking about, we were comparing Julius Caesar with Abraham Lincoln, because in a lot of ways they were so similar, and also in a lot of ways they were polar opposites. But I always found the idea or the notion compelling that what if Julius Caesar had reincarnated here in America in the form of Abraham Lincoln, which would sort of make sense because, the whole idea was that Julius Caesar was personally responsible for enslaving millions of people, like personally responsible for that. Led all these campaigns in what is now Western Europe, like hoovering people up into lives of slavery. And, I just thought the idea to be very poetic in that what if he had been, as a way of his, I guess, penance, he would be born again as Abraham Lincoln, where this time he would be leading the Civil War, which is all about, ending slavery. And then at the end of the war, just like with Julius Caesar, at the end of his Civil War, he gets assassinated. It was kind of like his soul coming back to make up for past misdeeds. Yeah, I find it interesting. I'm not saying that it's totally true or that everyone should believe that, but it's a fun little thought experiment I like to run through my head every now and then. That's one of the things about reincarnation that I think is very fun. Um, Historical figures coming back. And I always found those stories fascinating you've probably heard them yourself, of little kids being born in modern times. And they have all these memories and accounts of when they were like back in World War II or back in this days of yore. And they have way more detailed memories than they have any right having, especially as a kid that young, who's only like 2 or 3 or 4 years old. I always found those stories very fascinating as well. I love stories that validate my own opinions. Those are the best kinds, right? You love those stories. So, how many people are in the chat right now? 8? Okay. So, I wanted to discuss one of my own personal, I guess, favorite iconic historical figures, Miyamoto Musashi. I think a lot of you guys in the chat may already know who he is, right? You guys are familiar with the history? Yes? I think Puck Elf is familiar because he's all into like knives and swords and stuff. Yeah, Miyamoto Musashi, born I think it was like 1585, died 1645, I believe. Yeah, so 17th, 16th century, one of the most iconic cultural figures in Japan, probably the most iconic samurai in Japanese pop culture and lore and mythology and in literature. One of the most celebrated. His depiction, the list of his depictions in anime and Japanese culture are just go on forever, right? The most famous samurai who's probably ever lived. I mean, there were a few others in that contention as well. Yeah, what more can I say about him, right? He fought in, they say, about 60 duels, undefeated. I mean, of course he's undefeated because otherwise he'd be dead, because a lot of these duels were to the death. He was very famously a Ronin, which I will talk about in a bit, and wound up becoming a philosopher, an author, a poet, artist, calligrapher, because his idea was that basically the principles that you find in warfare can be applied to just about anything that you set your life out to do, right? You could take the principles that you've learned through combat and warfare and apply it in your trade, such as if you're like a merchant or a farmer or an artisan, an engineer or something, right? Hey there, Jason Finch. Yeah, he wiped out whole full schools of swordsmanship. Yep, he punked a lot of dudes back in his day. So yeah, he was an interesting guy. There's not really much that is confirmed about him historically. Most of what we know about him are secondhand accounts. A lot of it's very sparse, and actually the majority of the mythology of Miyamoto Musashi was actually brought about by it was actually a novel that came out in the 1800s. A lot of it was embellishment. There's very little historicity behind the the life and deeds of Miyamoto Musashi. So there's not really much that we can verify historically. It's just a lot of it's conjecture, a lot of it's just yeah, just what people write about him because his legend has grown so much. But yeah, there's very little like actual accounts from his day and age about him. So there's yeah, who knows really what he was really like, you know? Who really knows? Um it's hard to say. You know, he came up in a time in Japan where basically they had fought wars for entire generations. Eventually, one Tokugawa shogunate emerges victorious. Finally, peace is achieved in the land. There's no more war after like hundreds of years. And peace is finally established. And the Japanese secret to peace is pretty straightforward. You just destroy the fuck out of all your enemies until you're the only one left. And there you have it, peace, right? That is the time period in which Miyamoto Musashi came up. He was son of a samurai, grew up in a monastery, and there's a very famous account where he was involved in one of the last battles of the shogunate wars, where they finally established total peace. Peace meaning all the other enemies are destroyed. The common legend was that he was on the losing side and he had hid amongst the like piles of bodies and just slowly crawling through as the enemy went around, like stabbing all the dead bodies just to make sure everyone's dead. And they've somehow missed him and he made it out. Again, it could be total embellishment. It could be just some bullshit that some 19th century Japanese author made up. Who knows? Who knows? So yeah, there's very little we can actually verify about him. But his legend is cool, his story is cool. Just the idea, right, of a Ronin masterless samurai wandering around who's so skilled, who's so dedicated to the craft of swordsmanship that he could be godlike, and out of 60 duels, he wins 60 of them, becomes undefeated because of perfect skill and discipline and dedication. People find that character to be very compelling, myself included, right? He is very famously, like Puck Elf had mentioned, who wrote the Book of Five Rings, which I'd read multiple times when I was in college. And there are a lot of people who say, "Oh, I read the Book of Five Rings because it applies to business." And I'm like, "Really? That okay?" No, it's kind of weird that people say that. I mean, okay, the Art of War I can kind of get in terms of like being a businessman and reading it, or Machiavelli's The Prince. That makes sense, right? It's a good treatise on you know political science, I guess that's worth reading. Book of Five Rings, though, I don't know, because not to say that it's a bad book per se, but it's just that a huge chunks of it are very detailed about the warfare of that time, like very, very detailed. Like one of the bits that Musashi mentions was that he compares the advantages and disadvantages of using a bow, right? Japanese longbow versus firearms, right? The firearms of that time. So what he mentioned, I remember he mentioned that they both have their strengths and weaknesses. Musashi mentioned that in an open battlefield situation, you're better off using a bow because there's a higher rate of fire and more accuracy, and you can kind of see where your arrow is going, so you can adjust your aim. So you have to consider that we're talking about bows from like or guns from like late 1500s, early 1600s. Those were like muskets and flintlocks, right? So I can imagine that in a lot of ways those Japanese longbows were better than those guns, because those guns were guns didn't those guns were pretty unwieldy, right? Musashi did mention that the advantage of guns or firearms was for siege, like if you were defending against a siege, or if you were in, yeah, if you were like In siege warfare, guns were preferred, he said. Um, Especially because, like, if you are defending, like, a castle, right? And you're defending ramparts, it's a lot easier to fire a gun through ramparts than it is with a bow. It can be, like, a little hard and, a little awkward to maneuver it around. That's why he said guns were more preferred in the case of siege warfare, whereas bows were preferred in open warfare, right? Musashi was also known for developing the art of, using 2 swords. Well, it was actually to be more specific, his main martial art was while all the samurai in his day were using, a katana or a sword with both hands, Musashi said that it is actually preferable to use a katana with one hand because you have more range and motion and more, options with the different angles you can take because of the way, the wrist, right? Using 2 hands, he said it was difficult to do lateral movements with 2 hands, and, it was also easier to maintain your balance if you're using one hand. Yeah, and then he would use the, other hand for, a jite or a wakizashi, right? A short sword, using it as primarily as a parrying tool. That's why I guess he favored that, kinda like how fencers, they would use, like, their main sword, and then they would use that, I guess, the parrying, like, blade. Yeah, so yeah, he said that, it was better to use a katana with one hand, which was very contrary to the popular opinion back then. Although he does mention that there are times where you do have to use 2 hands, but it is worth learning one-handed as well. So, you know what, guys? Between you and me, as a Korean, um I think katanas are a bit overrated, honestly. There, I said it. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but as a Korean, I personally think the English longsword is better as a weapon. It was more versatile and it was more durable. And if you guys want a good comparison, check out Scola Gladiatoria, that channel. The host, Mark Eastman, does a really good breakdown comparing and contrasting katanas and longswords side by side. I learned a lot from that video, actually. One of the things that I learned was that English longswords, you can kind of bend them. They're a little flexible because the blades are made out of completely just made out of it's just one big piece of steel, really. Whereas in Japan, steel was a lot harder to come by. It was not as plentiful as it was in Europe. So the way they constructed katanas, essentially what it is at the end of the day, it's an iron rod with carbon steel, like forged and folded multiple times over it. So yeah, it's an iron rod with carbon steel, whereas an English longsword is just one big piece of steel, right? Um, so yeah, katanas are a lot more rigid. They are sharp as fuck. That you can't deny that, right? That is a given. They are as sharp as they come. But English longswords were more reliable in battle because they wouldn't break as easily. They say that if you bent a katana blade, that's it. That thing is useless forever. That thing's ruined. You don't get that back. Whereas you don't have to worry about that so much with an English longsword. Also, English longsword, even though it was not as good for cutting like the katana was, it was better at thrusting. And a lot of times when you are in combat with an armored opponent, it is much preferable to thrust than it is to cut. Because what are you going to do with a guy with armor on? Are you going to cut that? Yeah, that doesn't work like that. Katanas are basically designed to fight against people who are not wearing armor, right? It's a sidearm, essentially. It's a self-defense weapon. It's not a battlefield weapon, contrary to what a lot of people think. And that's another myth that I think a lot of people need to get over. Whenever you watch these medieval or ancient battlefield scenes, like everyone's got a sword. No, man. No. That would be like in 5,000 years they did a movie about our warfare today, but they had no understanding about how firearms worked, so they showed all the soldiers on the battlefield running around with pistols and revolvers. No, that's not how it works. Pistols and revolvers are not battlefield weapons. They're sidearms. They're self-defense weapons, right? Battlefield weapons would be something like an assault rifle or a battle rifle, right? Battle weapons in medieval Japan were longbows and pole arms, because katana's not really going to do shit if a guy's wearing armor. You're going to cut a guy wearing armor, really? Yeah, it doesn't work that way. I love how in these fucking movies, right, they got guys with like, especially, oh man, the worst was like Game of Thrones, where you have guys running up to like the main character and the enemy's wearing chainmail, and the main hero takes out his sword and he just slashes them across the chest, and the guy goes down. And I'm like, but that guy was wearing chainmail. How does that even work? Fucking idiots, right? You ever see those movies where the like guy's wearing plate armor and then his opponent comes up to him and he takes a sword and he swings it and he like cuts the dude's arm off, even though it's covered in plate armor? And I'm like, dude, people think swords can just cut through steel like it's butter? Right, Danny. That's right. That's why people came up with like war hammers and maces and shit. That's how you deal with dudes who are wearing full armor like that. Right? Swords traditionally were meant for like military officers, important people to keep at their side whenever they went out into the city or the town or they went traveling, so that they wouldn't get jumped by a group of bandits or mercenaries or assassins, right? It was a self-defense weapon. Same as how now in this modern age, people walk around with concealed carry. It's a self-defense weapon, right? You don't see soldiers in a modern battlefield storming an enemy position with their pistols out in the air. No, they're using rifles because that's a battlefield weapon. In those days, the spear was the battlefield weapon. If you look at ancient warfare and how they actually fought, everyone used spears. They didn't use swords. Okay. Swords were meant for like the officers or, yeah, self-defense. The one exception though was the Romans, but their situation was a little bit different because their shields were so huge. The other reason why a lot of ancient warfare doesn't use swords is because swords require a lot of lateral movement, and you can't really. It's really hard to maintain a tight formation using a sword because you're swinging around, right? If you're going to maintain tight formations, it's better to have a long thrusting weapon like a spear. That's why spears were always more favored in ancient and medieval. Well, medieval would be more pole arms, but in ancient warfare, most of the people would use spears. That was the battlefield weapon. The sword was the self-defense weapon for more of the elite, right? So yeah, that's the thing I find kind of funny, right? Like Musashi was considered greatest swordsman of his day, probably the best swordsman of all time. Doesn't mean that he's effective on the battlefield, even in the Japanese battlefield of that age. No, because everyone would be on horseback, everyone would be riding around shooting bows. When they get close, they take out their pole arms, their spears, their lances, and that's how they traditionally fought, right? A lot of people are saying stuff about weapons. Crossbow can take out most armor too. Yeah, everyone has a dagger, right? Puck elf, exactly. It's a sidearm, concealed carry, baby. Yeah, it's a pain in the ass to carry a sword around. I mean, it's not like people are going to use giant spears as self-defense weapons, right? Could you imagine going to like a restaurant or out in public with a giant spear strapped to your back? Hey there, freaky geek. All right. But yeah, Musashi was real interesting. I liked some of his tactics and his thinking, right? If you read his writings, because a lot of his writings, he's kind of criticizing other schools of Japanese swordsmanship. He's talking about this school and why their technique is flawed. He's talking about that school and why their technique is flawed, right? Because the guy fought over 60 duels, right? Spent his entire life wandering around, right? Challenging or getting challenged by dudes, and a lot of times fighting to the death, but not always. A lot of times they were actually friendly competitions using like training weapons, wooden weapons. There was a famous account where Musashi had gone to this monastery of warrior monks who were known for their technique in bows, or I think it was bows or like long or naginatas. Yeah, like the pole arms. And they were pole arm experts, right? And Musashi wanted to duel them and challenge them. And so they did, and he won. But then afterwards, he spent like the next couple days with them, just hanging out, eating, chatting, and um, exchanging techniques. And it was like they fight this crazy ass duel. And then after Musashi picks up his fallen opponent, he's like, "Oh man, you okay? You want to go get some lunch now?" The other guy's like, "Okay." So not all of his duels were to the death. I mean, they were competitive, but there were those famous ones that were to the death, right? Where he fought that one family where he basically killed like everyone that challenged him, and then that one dude who challenged him on the island, and then Musashi just gets off the boat, hits him with his oar hard in his head, and just walks off. Right? Hey there, Steve. And then there was that one instance where I don't remember the names because I didn't bother to do research too heavily on this, because it's actually he's not my main focus. But there was that one guy who was like famous for being unbeatable against swordsmen, because this guy had a Manariki Kuzari. He had like a chain with a weight at the end, and then he had a sickle. So whenever he would go up against a guy with a sword, he would like chain up the sword, tangle up the weapon, and then just get the guy with the sickle. And this guy was like unstoppable against all swordsmen until Musashi challenged him. And he uses his tried and tested two sword method, right? One long sword, one short sword. Guy tangles up Musashi's long sword, and Musashi's like, okay. And then he just chucks the short sword right at the guy, stabs him, kills him, right? Famous story. Did it happen for real? I don't know. But it's a cool story. So yeah, I mean his legend, man. I mean, they have movies about him, books. Everyone's so into him, right? He was the man. But it was cool some of his writings about some of these other Japanese schools, where he talks about how, that one school over there, their techniques are too flashy, right? He was all about being very conservative in your movements. Shortest path to your target is a straight line, right? No wasted movements, no fancy shit, just doing exactly what works, nothing more and nothing less, right? That was Musashi's mentality. No frills, no bells and whistles, no fancies. And again, you could tell that Musashi didn't play by the rules, because when he was dueling that one family that was all out to get him, what would he do? He would show up late because he knew it would piss them off, and then their guard would be down, and then he would kill them. So then they kind of figured out his trick. So he would show up early, right? And he would just do things to like throw people off. He would play mind games with people, because Musashi's thing was not about showing off how great of a warrior you are or how legendary you are. He was all about just doing what works, nothing more, nothing less. And if tradition dictates that you don't do what works, then tradition be damned. And if you got to consider, a lot of these samurais back in the day, a lot of them were really about showing off. They would wear fancy clothes. They would have like these declarations of their ranking. They wanted to make it known to everybody around them that they were the man because they were samurai. Musashi famously was not, and this part was most likely true. This guy, because a lot of these samurais, they were, very fashion conscious. Believe it or not, they did spend a lot of time on their look and their appearance, their mojo. Musashi was one of those guys that always looked like he was like a bum, right? Like he had just rolled out of bed, clothes were unkempt, barely washed. He looked like a straight up bum, and he was known as a Ronin, which a lot of people nowadays romanticize. But back in that day, no samurai wanted to be a Ronin. That was completely an undesirable thing. It basically meant that you were unemployed, you had no income, you had no status, and that you were a bum. And it was a source of great shame for a lot of samurai to be Ronin, right? Every samurai who's worth their salt is in service to a lord, a daimyo, or a shogun. That was that was their whole purpose, because not only was it honor and prestige and respect, but it was also your income, right? But if you're a Ronin, you had none of that. You were essentially a bum with a sword. So most samurai would eschew the possibility of being a Ronin, but yeah, Musashi seemed to like it. He seemed to revel in it. He seemed to actually embrace it. There were instances where he actually was offered positions and titles with certain lords and shoguns where he just refused. He's like, "No, I prefer to be a Ronin," which back then in Japanese society was just absolutely crazy. Absolutely, like people had no idea why anyone would choose to be a Ronin because it essentially meant that you were unemployed and you were also looked down upon and you were disrespected by your peers. So, yeah. And in a society where everything was about face, yeah, people would do whatever it took to not be a Ronin. And the fact that this guy embraced the life of Ronin ship, I mean, now we romanticize it. Now we make anime about it and being like, oh, look at that badass samurai wandering around by himself. But no, most samurai back then were like begging for jobs. They were like, oh God, I don't want to be a Ronin. That's embarrassing. Yeah, you were considered like a wild dog. You were considered a bum. All right, let's face it. You were considered a bum. You were considered a failure. It would be like, okay, you know what a Ronin, okay, a modern equivalent of a Ronin, the way to put it, okay, imagine if you knew someone who like graduated from like an Ivy League school with like a bachelor's and master's degree, and then they wind up working in like fast food. You'd be like, what the fuck happened, dude? That's kind of like how the Japanese back then would think of a Ronin. It was shameful, right? So, but Musashi seemed to revel in it. He had so many opportunities because his reputation grew. And I think part of the reason why his reputation grew was because he was just so okay with being a Ronin. People just thought that was so crazy and weird. People were like, "You're actively choosing to be unemployed and have no income? What? Why?" So, yeah, that's over romanticized, I think, the whole concept of a Ronin. Yeah, most samurai were terrified at the possibility of being a Ronin. So, okay. So, yeah, I've always thought Musashi was an interesting dude. Although, yeah, a lot of its stories, I'm not saying it's true or it isn't. You believe what you want, but there's very little verification from a historical perspective. I mean, there's some. I mean, we have some of his works, and we have that one famous, some of his calligraphy and some of his artwork, and a Book of Five Rings, and we know he did write that. But if you want a good breakdown of the story of Musashi, there's a two-part podcast series that Daniele Bolelli does on History on Fire, where he does a two-part episode or two-episode breakdown of Miyamoto Musashi, his life and his historical analysis. And I think it's worth a listen. Even if, regardless of whether or not you're interested in the character or not, or the person, it's definitely worth checking out. I'm a big fan of Daniele Bolelli's History on Fire podcast. I listen to it every chance I get. I'm also a huge fan of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast. So, yeah, if you want to learn more about him, I highly recommend checking those shows out. So, yeah, I always, so why do I bring him up tonight? Because, again, earlier I mentioned the idea of reincarnation. What if someone like Musashi were to be reincarnated in this day and age? What would that look like? That mentality, that like total mastery of skill, dedication to your craft, just completely stoic in your mannerisms, not attaching any kind of ego or pride. You're just there because you're dedicated at one thing, and that is mastery of your craft. What if a guy like that, the Ronin, were to be reincarnated in this modern day? Well, folks, I think I might have an idea, right? Um, when we think about, now, this is a artistic impression of what they think Musashi looked like, right? Probably 1620, 1610s, around there, right? Okay, so I'm going to present who I think, just, my own little fun little thought experiment, who I think could be the reincarnation of Miyamoto Musashi. And that would be this guy, Daigo Umehara. Well, actually, the Japanese call him Umehara Daigo, otherwise known as the Beast. Who is this guy? Whenever I think of what Musashi would look like if you were reincarnated in this day and age, I think of this man, Daigo Umehara. He is probably not probably, he is the most celebrated, famous, revered professional video gamer in all of Japan and in the world, but especially in Japan and East Asia. This guy is godlike in those communities. He is known as one of the most legendary Street Fighter players to have ever lived. Oh, well, I mean, he's still alive, but to have ever lived. He is the most famous and revered, right? There's a reason why I started in the Church of Dogman episodes. I started calling Dogman our Lord and Savior. I didn't come up with that. People in the Street Fighter fighting game community came up with that when they started talking about Daigo, because he is in a lot of ways like Miyamoto Musashi when it came to Street Fighter. Yeah, world renowned. People would just be in awe every time he came in here. I mean, look at this. Okay, hold on. Let me remove my. That's Daigo posing next to Evil Ryu. People would make fan art of him, right? I mean, hold on. I forgot to upload a few photos here. I'm going to do them right now while I speak. And if you're not a fan of fighting games or Street Fighter, I mean, you wouldn't understand like what this guy's deal is. Or so I'm going to try to really tonight try to give you a sense of like how good this guy really was, because it's hard for people to understand that unless they were actual Street Fighter fans. And just like Miyamoto Musashi, who came out with his book, The Book of Five Rings, Daigo also came out with his best-selling book, The Will to Keep Winning. Japan's first pro gamer shares his path to success in gaming and beyond. I mean, the guy is a bona fide millionaire. I mean, he is. Not just through tournament winnings, but through sponsorships and everything, endorsement deals. And the way he played Street Fighter was a lot like how Miyamoto Musashi would do swordsmanship, because in a lot of ways Musashi, again, like if you look at his teachings, he was very he taught about being very conservative in your movements. Don't try to be flashy or show off to the crowd or do any unnecessary movements. He was all about efficiency, skill, adapting to your opponent. That's it. No ego, no emotion even, because Daigo is very famous for going into these international Street Fighter competitions and just being completely stone-faced, stoic, just completely. And I've been a huge fan of Daigo for years because I'm a fan of fighting games, Street Fighter and Tekken. And yeah, he is pretty much mythical at this point for the fighting game community. So there are actually a couple examples that I want to show you just how good this guy was at Street Fighter. Hold on, let me find it. Okay, I'm pulling it up right now. And one of the things that I can tell you is that YouTube's actually pretty cool with video game clips for some reason. For some reason, those don't get flagged ever. So I feel like I don't ever have to worry about that. Okay. Okay, so this is a clip of Daigo playing against Gamer B. Daigo is Ryu. Daigo has always been Ryu, right? Primarily a Ryu player. Because again, Ryu represents that mentality, that Musashi mentality, where his moves are just very efficient, nothing flashy, no crazy shit. It's just fireball, Shoryuken, basic ass, straightforward karate. He's not doing all these flippity dippy weird shit all over the screen. He's not doing like crazy doll sim shit where he's like teleporting around or shooting like, like giant flames. He's not like Zangief who's like doing these power bombs, or Blanca who's like just flipping all over the place. No, he is Ryu. And what does Ryu represent in this fighting game mentality? Being conservative in your movements, not doing any flashy shit, not trying to show off. Just use the basics, but do it in such a way with your proper discipline, reactions, focus, and efficiency, just winning. That's why I feel like Daigo's mentality in playing Street Fighter is very similar to Musashi's mentality in swordsmanship. So, in this clip, Daigo is playing in a pretty high stakes tournament. He's Ryu on the right. To the left is Adon. Adon is this Muay Thai fighter who pretty much does the opposite of that. This guy's all over the screen, and he is being played by this man. This is Gamer B. That's his name. This dude is the #1 top player in all of Taiwan. I mean, this guy is also a Street Fighter celebrity, also legendary status. More into Chinese. He's more the king of like the Chinese and Taiwanese and Southeast Asian Street Fighter elite circles. He's like Daigo's like Taiwanese rival, but his approach to Street Fighter is very much like the opposite. And that's him playing as Adon on the left. Now, this particular clip, when I watched this fucking blew my mind, like totally. And it's gonna require a little bit of detail into how Street Fighter works. If you've never played, I'm gonna do my best to explain. This is what starts with. If you're familiar with Street Fighter, Ryu's got this one move called the Dragon Punch, where he basically jumps up in the air with a flying uppercut. And in most games, like if you're a Street Fighter player, most people would know that the purpose of the Dragon Punch is to either hit the guy out of the air if they jump at you, or to end your combos. You never just walk up to somebody and just do a Dragon Punch, because if they block it or if you miss and you spend all that time hanging up in the air, whereas the opponent's just like watching your body go up and being like, okay, now I can just fuck this guy up and do whatever fucking move or combo I please, right? If you're playing in a high level Street Fighter tournament against pros, if you miss one Dragon Punch, one Shoryuken, that's 60% of your life right there. That's the game. So most players who are smart know not to just willy-nilly throw out Dragon Punches, right? Dragon Punches are meant for when the guy is jump kicking you when he's in the air, because he can't block it then, right? It's the anti-air move, or if you land a combo and it's your combo ender, because it hurts. So what does Daigo do against the most famous player, his rival, his Southeast Asian Taiwanese rival? He does exactly the opposite of what you're supposed to do, which is totally nuts, because if he misses once, he's dead, right? But the thing is, he read Gamer B. It was like, I mean, I caught this clip before I got into the whole paranormal psychic stuff, so I wasn't really privy into thinking about those things. But I remember when I saw this for the first time, my first thought was like, holy shit, psychic abilities are real? That's what I legitimately thought. Because no one in their right mind would just walk up to a dude and just do a Shoryuken, unless you knew exactly what the move he was going to do. Because the thing about the Shoryuken is it actually has a lot of priority over other moves. because the first few frames of animation, especially in this game, are invincible. So basically, if you walk up to a guy in Street Fighter, especially 4, right, and if you think the guy is going to jab at you at the same time, and you do your Shoryuken wins. But the thing is, in order for you to pull that off, you have to absolutely predict not just the move he's going to do, but the timing of the move. And that is fucking bonkers. Because for him to just walk up to his opponent and just do a dragon punch meant that not only did he know exactly what the move he was going to do, but he knew exactly when he was going to do it. And in a game like Street Fighter, where there's so much variety and complexity, but he read that motherfucker like a book. And to see him do that live, especially to one of the other best players in the world, was fucking shocking. And I'm going to show you this clip right now. And if you can listen to the reactions of the commentators, they're just like, what in the fuck? All right, remember, Ryu is Daigo. Look at how he's jumping around.
Great reaction. There you go.
You can.
Oh.
Walk into the neutral jump.
Oh, man. Man, that gives me goosebumps every time I see that. That was like a moment in Street Fighter. That moment where that chain master chains up Musashi's sword, and Musashi's like, "Oh yeah," and he just chucks the Wakizashi at him. Right? I mean, he Musashi that shit. The fact that okay, it's one thing when he hits Gamer B out of the air with the Dragon Punch. But when he just walks up to him and just Dragon Punches just willy-nilly like that, that is just so crazy to do, especially at that high level of competition. Okay, let me just show you that one more time. It just every time that fucking clip gets me every time. I mean, this dude is real life Musashi right here.
Great reaction. There you go.
Oh.
Walk into the neutral jump again.
Rago!
Look at that crowd, man. People are like super.
I said he might try something, seeing as he's in winner's bracket, but I didn't see that coming, Zach.
Jesus Christ, man. So, yeah, I mean, okay, that's not even the craziest clip, okay? So the craziest clip, one of the most iconic clips, not just in Street Fighter history, but in gaming history, where if you understood the level of skill it takes to pull something off at this high stakes of a match, and okay, you know what? I'm going to just show it to you because this, when I remember the day I saw this, right? Because I'm in my 40s now, but back when I was in my early 20s, I was a bit of a pot smoker. I'm not going to lie, I admit. And back in the day when I was still in school, me and my homies, after class and after work, every night would get together at my buddy's apartment, take out the big old bong, fire up some Street Fighter 3 Third Strike or some Tekken or some Smash Brothers, get lit, and just it was like 3 and 4 guys. We just play Street Fighter and fighting games all night long, baby. God damn, I miss those days. But during those days, we were when YouTube was still in its infancy. We all huddled around a screen one day because they're like, "Holy shit, Donny, you got to see this." And when I saw this bit, it was almost life-changing, honestly. It was almost life-changing. Actually, I'll admit it was life-changing. And if you're a hardcore video game fan, even if you're not a Street Fighter fan, you probably know about this, but I'm guessing a lot of you guys aren't hardcore gamers. So you might not be aware of this. So if that's the case, let me give you a bit of an education here. The beast is unleashed. This was one of Daigo's most epic, famous moments. Okay, so this is Third Strike. Okay, my personal favorite Street Fighter game. And this is the winners final in Evo, which is like the World Series of fighting games. Okay, so to the left, Daigo's playing as Ken, not Ryu this time, Ken, because in Third Strike, Ken was actually the better of the two. And to the right, his opponent playing as Chun-Li, who incidentally in this particular game was by far the best fucking character in the game. Everyone who's played Street Fighter 3 Third Strike will tell you Chun-Li was by far just too good. It was like if you went to a serious Street Fighter 3 tournament, like 60% of the players there are all picking Chun-Li. It got kind of stupid after a while, you know. So Daigo's opponent this night was a gentleman who I have had the pleasure of fighting myself, and that is Justin Wong, the guy on the right. Justin Wong was Daigo's American counterpart. He was probably the best Street Fighter player in North America when Daigo was in his prime. So they were like rivals. It was like Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, or Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed, right? He was that guy, right? And he was the best player in America. Probably, well, there were a few people in that running, but he was, yeah, what again, celebrity, again, probably like a millionaire due to all of his winnings. And especially Marvel Capcom, man. This dude was the dude on the right here with the glasses, Justin Wong. Easily the best Marvel Capcom 2 player of all time, hands down. I mean, shit. That guy, no one's coming close to that guy in his Marvel Capcom 2 career. So that's his opponent. And Justin is playing as the best character in the game, Chun-Li. Daigo is playing as Ken on the left, who's also probably the second best character. Which is not true. He wasn't actually angry. Okay. Now, the first thing to consider here, look at the life bar, right? Daigo's losing this match. He is like on his last livers, and Chun-Li, who is really good at keeping people out, it's got this huge life lead. So it's just like 2 hits and Daigo is dead. So he better not fuck up. And this is winner's final, by the way. Shit, man. Shit. Okay. Here we go. I'm just going to show it to you. Sorry, I thought it was playing. Okay.
Rare footage of Daigo actually angry. Justin's turtle style. Overcome Rao. Now on the verge of putting Daigo down. 1-0.
Okay, so let me tell you why this shit's so crazy, okay? Is this running okay? All right, cool. All right. So, let me analyze this for you. Let me explain, okay? Now that I showed you once. Okay, so the match starts off right. Daigo's got this much life left. So basically, if Justin just lands 2 more hits, Daigo is dead, right? So he's fucking him up in the corner. This is where Daigo's in danger mode, right? When Chun-Li is in the corner, Daigo's on the attack, right? But now that Chun-Li jumps out of the corner, now Daigo has to chase Chun-Li, which means he's more likely to run into her attacks. Now Justin's creating distance, right? Oh shit! Now they traded, right? So Daigo's literally got like no life left. Okay, so not even if he blocks a special move, he's still dead. He's like down to the last pixel. Okay, so what Justin's doing right now is Chun-Li's super move. A super move is basically you got to spend your resources where you do this move where it's you're basically invincible, right? You're basically invincible. You get hit by it, it takes off like half your life. And also, if you block it, you're still going to take some damage, which most people would accept, except for the fact that Dai goes down to his last pixel, which means if he even blocks it, he's dead. So what does he do instead? He uses, in this particular game, there's a mechanic called parrying. Now, parrying is basically when you tap forward on the controller towards your opponent at the exact same time that they do a move, and you have to be perfect within the frame. Now, a frame in a video game is like in this game, it's like 1/30th of a second. So he has to tap forward to the timing of each of those attacks to the 1/30th of the second perfectly in order to parry it. Now, when you parry the move, you don't take any block damage. And not only that, but you can counterattack right away because you're parrying, you're not blocking it. Now, this is the even crazier part, right? Not only is he parrying all of the moves, but Chun-Li's last move, that last high kick she does, there's a bit of a delay. And what does Daigo do during that delay? He jumps, right? Why does he jump? Because his counterattack is he throws out a jump kick before he even lands. He parries that kick in the air first. That's the last kick in the super move. So Justin's done. And Daigo, after having parried that last kick to the 30th of the second, before his feet even touches the ground again, throws out a jump kick. And the reason why he throws out that jump kick and the reason why he jumps in the first place is because without that jump kick, his counterattack doesn't kill Justin. Watch his counterattack. Remember, he starts his counterattack before his feet even touch the ground. And he proceeds to do the most optimal combo. He does a jump kick. Hold on, let me rewind that. This is literally the most optimal fucking thing you could do. Right? He does. Hold on, let me slow this down even further. Okay, sorry, I'm just fucking around with slow-mo. Right? To parry, 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 parry. Jumps in the air, parries. Jump kick, down medium, into Shoryuken, combo into super. Dead. The fucking level of... I mean, there's probably like 5-10 people in the entire world who could do that. Not just to do that, right? It's one thing to try to do that in training mode. You could probably pull that off maybe if you do it for a few hours. But to do it at the World Series of Street Fighter while you're losing to the best player in North America, while everyone is watching, and then to pull that once in a lifetime freaking move, it's like that's kind of like if you're watching like the NBA finals and some guy just goes from the other side of the court, just throws the ball from over behind him and then gets the fucking game-winning three-pointer, right? It's like that. And that's the part that made me think, man, maybe he is the reincarnation of Miyamoto Musashi. You know, this guy ridiculous. And when I saw that clip, my jaw was on the fucking floor, man. I was just like, holy shit. So yeah, that's just the thing I wanted to share with you. Just, you know, who I think could be if reincarnation were real, and if everything we knew about Miyamoto Musashi were real, and if Miyamoto Musashi were reincarnated as someone in this modern world that we live in, I like to think that it was Daigo Umehara. Yeah, that's him with Justin right there. Man. Now, before I let you guys go, I'm not going to say that he is, in my opinion, the best. I don't think he's the best Street Fighter player right now. I mean, he is up there, but I don't think he's the best right now. There were a few guys that, you know. Okay. Should I show you just one other clip? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most storied fucking moments in all of video gaming history. I mean, especially if you understand how really difficult it is to parry Chun-Li's super like that. I mean, try it out. Try it out. Yeah, he was the master, just like Musashi, right? So my favorite bit in Musashi, my favorite line, I'll leave you at this, was that, you know, he talks about like being comfortable with death, right? You know, one of his lines was that if you are going to dedicate your life to the life of warfare and combat, you have to get comfortable with death. I mean, you have to be real comfortable with death. You have to basically be a morbid person and think of yourself as a walking corpse, because that's what, at the end of the day, as the life of a swordsman, that's what you are. If you dedicate your life to this, to war and combat. And the reason why he says this is for very practical reasons, because once you accept death like that, then you no longer fear death. And the fear of death, as someone who's dedicated themselves to a life of warfare and combat, is the weakness to overcome. That is the hindrance, because without the fear of death, then you are totally free to be a complete master in the skill and craftsmanship. But too many people are held back by the fear of death. And just like that, just like with Daigo, right? I don't think this dude had any fear in him. He had no fear in him when he did this move. Like, he was like, I think in this moment, he just accepted that, okay, I'm going to do it. I know it's going to work. I don't even care about being embarrassed. I'm just going to do it.
Rare footage.
Shit, I suck at this.
Rare footage of Daigo actually angry. Just its turtle style. Overcome Rao. Now on the verge of putting Daigo down 1-0.
Yeah, now that's a true fucking warrior. Okay, guys, now I'm all excited to play video games, so I'm going to go shut this shit off now, turn on some Helldivers 2, and we're going to go to town, baby. Have a good night, folks. I think Tex is going to be on soon, so if you guys want to hop on over there and check that out. But yeah, I hope you guys like this little presentation, this little chat. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. I'm going to play some Helldivers now. Peace.